Hello, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever and whenever you're listening. Thanks for tuning in to this little thing we like to call the Simply the West podcast. I'm Phil Irvin, joined by Blake Molly. Blake, what's the good word from the good life there in Nebraska?
Oh, well, in Nebraska, we're either having a fiesta or a siesta because of the bye week. Either we're partying because we're thanking the Lord that we're not having to play and watch another one of those games for one more week in a row, or we're napping through it to try to wait for the next game to see. Hopefully, there's some improvement. The weather is starting to turn out here in the upper Midwest, and it's starting to get to that point where you're starting to smell a little bit of the winter months coming.
Yeah, it'll be here before you know it. Dear old Nebraska, you will have 2 weeks to figure out what the heck happened up here in Minnesota and where to go in its building process. Halfway through Scott Frost's second year, kind of at a crossroads in the early part of the Frost era there in Lincoln. A game like that gives us a chance, Blake, to kind of reflect on what it takes to build a winner in general, especially in this conference and this division. In the Big Ten West, you really kind of have three schools at different stages of doing just that right now. Minnesota, obviously a little further along than maybe even a lot of us thought. Nebraska, not quite as far along as maybe anybody thought. And then Purdue, which, depending how you look at it, has either taken a step back or right on schedule. A lot of uncontrollable factors have kind of impacted the Boilermakers season so far. So that's where we're going to start with this week's sode. But first, speaking of building a winner, let's talk about what we've got brewing tonight for Big Ten Brews. What are you drinking there, Blake?
I'm sticking with the Thunderhead Brewing Company out of Kearney, Nebraska. It's the Golden Frau honey wheat, kind of their version of uh, the Honey Weiss from Kugels. Not quite as good as Honey Weiss from Kugels, but it is pretty darn good. I would recommend it to anybody that comes if you're looking for more of a lighter craft beer.
Sure. I stayed local as well, very local. This brewery, Invictus Brewing, is just down the street from where I live here in Blaine, Minnesota, actually. And it's a spot that I try to get to on a weekly basis if I can. Really good beer. They brew a lot of different ones. And there's also a restaurant inside the brewery called the Tipsy Steer that has very good food. So if you're in the Twin Cities ever, it's worth a drive up to the Northwest Metro to check out Invictus Brewing. It's also adjacent, kind of a tangent to the National Sports Center, which is the largest youth sports complex in North America for sure. It might even be in the world. They've got like 30 some soccer fields, 8 hockey rinks. There's a big stadium that has lots of events, and it's cool. We get to see fireworks from our front yard at some of the large international tournaments they have there and those sorts of things. So Invictus is right next to that. This beer is, I'm a big ale guy. As if you've followed diligently through this season, you may have picked up on by now. But as Blake mentioned, now that the weather's starting to turn a little bit, it's brown ale season. The fall's a good time to break out the brown ales and get them going through the winter. So this is just called a James, and it's a brown ale. Very good, balanced, darker ale, and goes down real smooth, but it's got a nice kind of toffee-ish flavor in there. So I hadn't tried this before just a second ago when I cracked this open, but it's very good. Invictus never disappoints. So with that, let's talk about them Gophers. Blake, we've had some shuffling in our power rankings this week. Minnesota up to number 2 by virtue of being 3-0 in the conference, and they looked really good against Nebraska. I was there in person. From what I was able to see through the rain, sleet, and snow, PJ Fleck's team is really starting to get some things figured out. Say what you want about the guy. Some people might call it charisma, others might call it hubris, maybe some combination of the two. But he's getting results. He got results at Western Michigan, and you just look at the kind of timeline of his success. Gophers were 5-7 in his first year, and he really inherited a mess. And it was a program and really an athletic department for a long time just couldn't get out of its own way. You had a bunch of players suspended due to sexual assault allegations. You had Jerry Kill leave, which is tough because he really did build that program into, to heights that it hadn't been in a long time. Tracy Claeys kind of gets run out of town, kind of runs himself out of town a little bit. But it was a tumultuous time when PJ took over a couple years ago. And then about halfway through last season in year two, although according to PJ Fleck, it was technically year one because the year before that he was famous for calling year zero. Um, but in year 1/2, if you're in PJ Fleck years or normal human years, Gophers won 3 of their last 4 last season, and that included obviously beating Wisconsin and then clobbering Georgia Tech in the Quick Lane Bowl. And after trouncing Illinois and Nebraska, Minnesota's won 9 of its past 10 games going back to last year. 6-0 this season, already bowl eligible. 3-0 in Big Ten play and tied for the lead in the division. And maybe most notably, they're a 28-point favorite against another football team. That speaks as much to Rutgers' ineptitude as it does to Minnesota's success. But Minnesota really clicking on all cylinders, and they didn't do anything a whole lot sexy against Nebraska. A lot of that inside zone, mano y mano, on both sides of the ball. They really dominated and controlled the line of scrimmage, and we'll get into why a little bit more when we talk about Nebraska. But they wanted it more. It was very evident. Being at that game in person, that game meant a lot to Minnesota. It means a lot to fans here anytime they get to beat a blue chip program, whether it's Nebraska or Wisconsin. Gophers fans are interesting. There aren't a ton of them. I've joked it's the 10th show in town behind all the professional teams, and that number might not be wholly accurate, but the folks who are Gopher football fans specifically are very, very passionate. They've obviously experienced a lot of down years, so they're enjoying this little run and where things are at. And I have a theory after seeing that game in person and having spent a little bit of time around the program. I covered it a little bit when I worked at Fox Sports North a few years back during the Jerry Kill era. Um, they're building a new athletes village, so they're trying to join the college sports arms race, Blake. But at the same time, it's a school with not a lot of recent tradition. They don't have a ton of great facilities. Yeah, they're sponsored by Nike, so there's definitely something to be said for that. But sometimes I wonder if these guys at the Northwesterns and Minnesotas and some of these middle of the road or whatever you want to label them as Big Ten programs, I put Purdue in there as well, maybe they play their tails off just for the fact that they aren't as entitled as somebody who, walks around a place like Lincoln, Nebraska, or even Columbus, Ohio, and has the world at their fingertips. Essentially, it's not like that here in Minnesota. It's just not. They any sports market will latch on to a winner, but at the same time, you're not the biggest show in town, and I wonder if sometimes being the biggest show in town is a detriment to a school like maybe say Nebraska that obviously has some culture issues it's still trying to address.
Yeah, and I think you're right. They do play really, really hard, but I will say that PJ Fleck, for like you said, his personality is flashy. It's rah rah, siskumba. He says "Skyuma" all the time, which
Row the
apparently
boat.
came from the 1800s when somebody used to think
Yeah,
it was a rallying cry for something, but it actually means nothing. Um, so
correct.
which is hilarious to hear somebody say that. Uh, but that being said, he hasn't fallen into the trappings of what a lot of coaches will try to do to upgrade their talent level. The thing that Tracy Claeys and Jerry Kill really did a good job of that was that they had actually pretty good offensive and defensive lines pretty much all the time. Like, wasn't there Rashad Higgins was one of their really good or I can't remember who it was, but there was a really good defensive alignment a couple years ago. I think he was
Hageman, yeah, plays in the NFL
Yeah,
now. Yep.
whatever it is. Um, he was really they've had really good frontline players. They just couldn't really quite get the top notch talent on the outside. So they were kind of building more like Iowa, although I would say Iowa has really good skill positions players this year for sure. But uh, so what you're seeing now is that basically PJ was like, we still need to upgrade our talent up front first, and that's why you saw just small increases those first couple years in terms of how well they were playing. But he was able to also find a couple really good gems within and around the Minnesota area. And you got Ottman Bell, you got Johnson, Tyler Johnson, you got all these other really good running backs. Ibrahim, uh, I can't.
Rodney Smith,
Rodney
Shannon
Smith.
Brooks.
Yeah.
Don't forget about Rashad Bateman out at the other wideout spot too. They're
Yeah.
loaded all of a sudden. It's crazy. You're absolutely right. They've really built on those skill positions for sure.
But they didn't start with those guys. They started with the up front because he realized, and especially in the Big Ten, in this league, if you don't have at least a serviceable front line, at least on offense and defense, you are going to get killed. Nebraska and their we're going to continue talking about how they're currently building, but like right now where they're at basically is they graduated fifth year seniors and now have younger players that were recruited by Mike Riley and Bo Pelini. The defensive and offensive lines, even under Pelini, were starting to get eroded pretty heavily, which is why Pelini was turning towards freshmen that were talented. We'll talk more about this, but there's a real big danger for playing offensive linemen, particularly at a younger age, because I used to joke about this, but a lot of times getting to the NFL isn't always about talent. It's actually about pain tolerance. And if you're getting hit that early on in your career without getting growth put into you before you're ready to get hit like that by some of these big defensive linemen, you're going to have a hard time making it through. A prime example with Nebraska is Nick Gates, who started as a freshman and basically he didn't quit, but he left to go to the NFL, even though he probably would have got drafted, but he went undrafted because he was like, I can't handle another year of this wear and tear on my body anymore. And he actually regressed from his freshman year because he wasn't physically ready. He might have had the talent, but he wasn't physically ready. So it's really impressive to see how PJ Fleck is going to do. So really, but we still don't quite know how good they are because they really didn't push around Nebraska up front, which is contrary to popular belief amongst Nebraska fans. But they did influence the linebackers and get some funny things that they were doing with the defensive line that somehow opened up some holes. The linebackers were over pursuing mainly because there was no edge being set and they basically were having to pick between two or three holes. And give credit to Minnesota's running backs when Nebraska did pick right, they made the Cornhuskers miss tackles or the Cornhuskers arm tackled them or tried to arm tackle. So uh, it'll be really interesting to see how they hold up against an Iowa or even um, a Wisconsin. And I think they play Penn State this year too. Is that right?
I do.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they will hold up if their offensive line is serviceable enough to at least get them some yardage and some points on the board against that. And same with their defensive line if they're able to at least slow down some teams as well. I don't think they're quite as dominant as where PJ would like them to be against teams like Iowa, Wisconsin, and Penn State. But um, they at least will give them a chance. Whereas Nebraska, at least on offense, isn't going to be given too much to anybody behind there a chance to win many games.
Yeah, that's the next step, right? You've proven that you can beat some teams in your division. Now, can you beat the teams that are at the top of the division toward the end of the year when you've had that physical toll taken on your body and when the chips continue to get higher? We'll find out. They shouldn't look ahead. They've got a really good chance to be 8-0 at Rutgers Saturday, 2:30 p.m. on Big Ten Network. Then you host Maryland. Like we said, great chance to be 8-0 heading into that final stretch of the season. Let's talk about Purdue next, number 5 in our power rankings. And when you talk about building a program, hard to imagine a guy you might want to pick to do it more than Jeff Brom. He had success at Western Kentucky. turned the Hilltoppers into a winner. We sing his praises a lot on this show. Needs more recruits at a lot of key positions. His teams at Purdue have gone 7-6, 6-7, and now this year 2-4 and 1-2 at Big Ten play. Obviously, you've had the injuries to Sindelar and Rondale Moore. Plummer looked great at quarterback this past weekend for the Boilermakers. But where do you think Purdue's at in terms of both its ceiling as a program, but then also kind of where it's at in this building process in year 3 under Coach Brom?
Well, you're gonna have to see how they do next year more than anything, because that'll give 3 full recruiting classes. Brom had probably one of the best adjustments that I've seen in a while, and this is why it's probably frustrating for Husker fans. But you got to remember, Brom's in year 3. He has a little bit more depth to work with, at least on his schedule, from a defensive and offensive line perspective. He replaced 3 starters with 3 younger freshmen and sophomores basically on the offensive line, and then they actually had time. Jack Plummer, who looked terrible in previous weeks, finally had time to actually pick apart a defense. Now, Maryland is schizophrenic. They can beat Texas 2 years in a row, but then they look like crap against Purdue, or even, I think did they lose to Temple? Is that right? I can't remember who it was.
That was their first loss after handing it to Syracuse in a game that had everybody saying, "Oh, watch out for Maryland." And I don't think many people are saying that just a few weeks later.
So you can't discount Maryland's talent on their end, but that's what we're seeing as far, and that's why it's probably frustrating for Husker fans, because the word on the street is that there is some talent that probably is better than some of the offensive linemen that are currently playing right now for Nebraska. But if you throw them out there, it might be too early for their development, and then you lose that chance to have them in the program that extra year and give them the best shot at getting drafted high. And you're trying to do what's best for them and for the program at the same time. And so you might actually sacrifice wins now for wins later. And that's kind of, but that's also frustrating as a fan, because you want to see results every year. And I think Purdue's ceiling under Brom, man, he makes you believe that you can see Purdue pulling off some pretty special seasons.
As long as he sticks around.
Yeah, but maybe not consistently always having 10-win seasons, but kind of having like Iowa like success, where every once in a while they have a 10, 12, 13 win season, and go on to win a Big Ten championship, or at least play for one. Who knows? But he also makes you believe that maybe he can get them to become a power, because he's that good of a recruiter as well. I don't know. We're kind of I feel like we're almost stepping into a new day and age of college football, where some of these teams that you never would have thought of are going to get better and stay really good. But
the parity that is higher at a higher level than it's ever been. There's more talent around the country. There's more and more schools putting resources, high schools putting resources in developing their athletes. There's more and more kids playing year round. We had our conversation the other day about, where economically college athletics is going. I think you're right. I think we're on the cusp of some real change, and probably could see a school like Purdue benefiting from it. I think there's no doubt about that. After that 40-14 victory over the Terrapins, Purdue is at Iowa. So there's a good benchmark game for you right there, Blake. 11 a.m. on ESPN2 this weekend. We'll see what the injury situation ends up being, and we'll get to the Hawkeyes in a minute. But man, you lose that game, if you're Iowa, things are gonna really go haywire in Iowa City. But first, let's head east of there, across the Missouri River, and talk about the Huskers. The Nebraska loses 48-7 to Ohio State a couple weeks back, and you just say, yep, definitely not there yet in year 2 under Scott Frost. The talent level is just not there. Hard to walk away from the Minnesota game a couple weeks later, 34-7 defeat, and say anything, but they're really nowhere close to where they want to be. I think it's pretty apparent Nebraska was overrated coming into this year, and credit. I know the local media there in Omaha and Lincoln has taken a lot of flack. They weren't the ones drumming up this team to be a 10-win, division contender. Uh, I think Coach Frost was very, very positive and confident about his team going into the year. And look, why wouldn't you be? You've got your feet under you. You had a great end of the season last year. These kids are on social media and see what you're saying. I think he used that as a way to pump them up and let them know that he believes in them going into the year. But then you had the national media kind of jumping on. Nebraska became kind of the darling pick and hasn't really lived up to those expectations. And hey, we're as guilty of it as anybody. I picked them to win the freaking division, which obviously does not look like it's going to happen now. But I go back to what the athletic director, Bill Moose, said. The goal this year was always to get to 6. He's built programs. He was at Washington State. He's been at other schools as well. He spent time at Oregon. He's seen teams build from the ground up, and he knows as well as anybody that it's going to take time. And I admire the fans. I work with a guy who's a big Nebraska fan, and he's always saying it was always going to take 3 to 5 years. And I admire that discipline because even I probably didn't exercise enough of that coming into this year. It was pretty easy to buy into the hype because we want so badly for there to be a winner in Lincoln. So getting a 6 now is going to be a challenge. Definitely not insurmountable, but Nebraska's got a lot of things to fix. You, Blake, saw the film, and Coach Scott Frost talked about the film review that he did, and even he walked away from the game Saturday thinking his lines just really got pushed all over the field, and maybe was questioning the effort and desire. But after watching it, it really became more of a scheme and alignment type thing, especially on defense, which you alluded to early. Linebackers being out of position, defensive line trying to overcompensate for that. And against that inside zone Minnesota runs so well, that's a recipe for disaster, especially with the way Minnesota's 3-headed running back monster is running. Didn't like the way Nebraska's offensive line played at all. They really kind of vanillaed up the playbook for Noah Vedral, who I actually thought played pretty well. He definitely didn't lose the game and looked very confident and decisive, which we kind of expected. But there's the scheme and technique and assignment part of it, but then there's the desire part of it too. And even some of the leaders on the team have said, we need to get our want back. And I was not a high level athlete. That's why I'm sitting in my kitchen doing a podcast at age 30. But I just can't wrap my head around being a Division I scholarship college athlete at a place like Nebraska and only getting so many opportunities to go out and do what you love and just playing without that type of desire. And it's not that it was there throughout the night Saturday, but to not bring that every play, I can't wrap my head around that. I struggle with that. They knew what Minnesota was going to do, especially on offense, and they couldn't stop it. Reminded me, in the aftermath of that game of some of the old Husker documentaries that fans our age are used to watching. There's one clip, I think it was on one of the Big Ten Network's documentaries about the teams in the 90s, and former Husker offensive lineman Rob Zadeka essentially detailed how he and the starting offensive line would get they were dominating so much and they wanted to keep things interesting. So in the middle of games, they'd actually line up and tell the opposing defensive line where the play was going, and they'd still run it for 20 yards. They were just that dominant. And that's what it reminded me of, Minnesota being able to do that. And obviously the assignment part of it plays into that, but have some pride, have some heart. We'll see how much this team has during the second part of the season. They have a bye week to get healthy. Adrian Martinez, J.D. Spielman, Wandale Robinson hurt his ankle against Minnesota, but it sounds like he should be okay. Besides those guys, especially on offense, somebody's got to step up. We'll see what kind of changes are made, whether it's personnel. We're getting to that point in the year where every program, not just Nebraska, starts really weighing its redshirt situation. Obviously, you have the 4 games now where a player can participate in 4 games and still not burn a redshirt. So that is going to come into play for Nebraska. I just observed this being at the game, and I want to bring it up and then get your thoughts, Blake. Nebraska needs more Garrett Nelsons. Garrett Nelson is a freshman linebacker, outside linebacker from Scotts Bluff. He has a blonde mullet, and he's a psycho. There's a video of him from training camp where they were doing the Nebraska drill, which is kind of like the Oklahoma drill, but with more players. And he got so in the mix that his helmet popped off. And rather than bowing out of the drill, he actually went and tried to make the tackle without his helmet. He didn't play a whole lot till the second half on Saturday, but sitting up in the end zone, behind the end zone, with my dad and a few other family members. And my dad kept saying, "Who's that number 44 just like pacing on the sidelines like a pissed off bull?" And I said, "That's Garrett Nelson." And he was just so into the game even when he wasn't playing. And he wanted to be on the field so badly. And then when he finally got out there, he wasn't the fastest guy, he wasn't the strongest guy, he's not even the biggest guy yet. He's a freshman. But he went full bore. Balls to the wall, as my high school coaches used to say. And when you have that type of desire, that can make up for the lack of talent, and it can make up for the lack of the culture you're trying to instill. They need more guys. Every team needs more guys like that who just love playing football. Frost brings it up all the time. I think he's a really good example of that. Again, it can make up for a lot until you continue to build up these recruiting classes. If you're a Husker fan, maybe 8 wins this year, definitely get to a bowl game. That's just going to be huge for this program to get that much more extra practice. And then
8 wins.
if you're if you're using Brom and at the most, no way they beat Iowa or Wisconsin. Indiana next week is going to be tough. Who else do we have in there?
Purdue.
You got Maryland. Who knows? Purdue. If Purdue's hitting its stride, I think it's pretty obvious Nebraska has to take every single team in this league very, very seriously at this point. But it's looking like 8 wins is the max. It was always going to take time, but it's looking harder than anyone expected. Blake, your thoughts? Rant over.
Well, and we were talking about this before the podcast. Really, the linchpin of a 3-4 defense, especially, are those outside linebackers, because they always talk about with 4-3, you're kind of playing man to man. The 4 defensive linemen are playing man on man for the most part. Fewer double teams are getting on the defensive linemen because they're trying to get to the second level as much. It's a lot more difficult from that perspective, but you need really good defensive ends to set the edge, and those are where the freaks are. The freaks on a 3-4 are the outside linebackers, because they have to be a hybrid of defensive end, outside linebacker, and safety in some respects. They're the linchpins, and that's where the talent gap really on Nebraska is very noticeable. Yes, the inside linebackers struggled, but I do believe it looked like that they were trying to overcompensate for some of the lack of edge setting that was happening. And then and so was the other defensive linemen were doing the same thing, where they couldn't trust the edge was going to be set, and so they were getting out of position on some things. Or in some respects, there was a couple times where I saw guys not actually getting their eyes in the backfield, and they were just kind of putting their heads down, not trying to make, like, from a defensive line perspective, they weren't trying to make a stop on the ball carrier as he went by. That's assignment football, but not great football, or even good above average football from that perspective. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I actually think that we're going to probably see Garrett Nelson a lot more, because it's been very obvious, especially against Ohio State and Minnesota, and even in the Colorado game, that our outside linebackers, especially Alex Davis, unfortunately, I think he has a good story. He didn't really play much football in high school, but he's too slow, and he's not squeezing down on backside pursuit. He's not squeezing down on when they're running at him, and that's really what they were doing. It was almost, they looked like Minnesota was looking on the sidelines, finding where number 22 was, and they were running right at him all game long, because they knew he couldn't set the edge and squeeze it down. He's too small. He's not big enough to hold up against bigger. I mean, he was getting blasted by tight ends, and I know that Minnesota's got bigger guys, but it's been that way all season long. Jojo Doman, he's not big enough to hold up against a tackle or a guard pulling, or a really big tight end to squeeze that down. We just don't have those guys. Like that's the reason why Wisconsin's defense is so good because the 3-4, the reason why it's so successful is because it's an odd front. It allows for outside linebackers that are freaks to basically go play really good. And they're finding, and that's where their walk-on program is coming on because they found a lot of good walk-ons to play those outside linebacker positions. And the 3-4 is not run on, and so it's not run that much on the high school level, and that's why it takes a long time to get middle linebackers up to speed because those middle linebackers have to split duties of one middle linebacker who basically got to go play football, get to the ball in a 3-4. Now in a 4-3, excuse me, and now in a 3-4, they have to split that. And so they have to exchange positions based off of what their keys are. And that's why it's so difficult for them to figure out where their run fits are supposed to be. It's really hard to recruit guys, and it takes time to get them into that system. I have a sneaking suspicion that you're going to see Honus and Colin Miller be really good next year. This year, it's going to be difficult because they don't have guys on the outside that they trust, and that's why they were over pursuing. And they're not quite good enough to pick out what lanes they're supposed to be going after right now. Really frustrating from a Nebraska perspective. It's going to be really interesting to see who they allow to play, though, because they're in that sweet spot of do we burn some guys' red shirts or do we red shirt them all and just build a bunch of depth for the next couple years? Can we win enough games to get those 17 extra practices in December? I don't know if we can without burning a few red shirts of guys that we don't really want to burn. That's my thoughts on it.
I'm glad I don't have to make the decisions. One other just observation from that game before moving on, getting back to I think some of the points you're making about maybe assignment versus effort. You have Minnesota runs that become classic no huddle. I think of Peyton Manning with the Indianapolis Colts a lot. Get up to the line, survey the defense, bark out some signals, look to the sideline. Okay, what play do we actually want to run? It gets signaled in, and then they go from there. It's very much reading and reacting to the way the defense is aligned. Tanner Morgan, by the way, he has played great in conference play. More than just a game manager. I think he's done a really good job running that offense, and that plays into this too. But you saw, I would say at least 50% of the time while that game was still in doubt, Nebraska's defense really trying to adjust on the fly to that with only a few seconds between when Minnesota gets ready to run the play and the snap. And I think there were 3 or 4 guys for about 50% of the plays while that was still a game who, when the ball was snapped, looked like they didn't know where to be. There was a lot of arms up, looking around like, what's my assignment? Are you covering him? Where's my zone? What's my spot? What's my fit? So having reflected and remembering seeing that a lot, it wasn't as surprising to see kind of your observations and the observations of others, including Frost, about just the way that thing kind of went down on the defensive side of the ball. In any case, it is over half an hour into this episode, and we've only mentioned the Badgers in passing and have not said the name Jonathan Taylor yet. Both fantastic again this past weekend, this time against a top 10 defense in Michigan State. Are you kidding me, Blake? 38-0, another shutout for this team. Just shows to me Wisconsin far and away the best team in this division. We've talked about how good that defense is, the talent and the effort and the desire and some of the individual performances, but scheme-wise too, they make it pretty confusing. You never know where they're coming from, and they really don't make a whole lot of mistakes. Badgers just seem to look better and better every week, don't they?
Oh, they're freaks. I mean, that Jim Leonard he's a freak himself. I mean, gosh, he won the dunk contest and he was a walk on and he's like 5'4" or something. I mean, he's not that short, but he's not very tall. And then he
Kind of
played in the
looks like
NFL
it.
for a number of years. He looks, I mean, that's how big their guys are. That's why he looks so small too. But I mean, I love watching Wisconsin play on defense, especially. Their offense can be a little bit vanilla, but it's really fun when you get those when you see Jonathan Taylor make some he makes something out of nothing. Their offensive line is not as good as it's been in years past, but it's still I think Jonathan Taylor is making it a lot better. But even look at his stats; he had 26 carries for only 80 yards this week, and and Jack Cohn was asked to make a lot more throws on third down or even first down a couple times to get the win this week, and he did. It was very well schemed. There's Urban Meyer's Urban Analysis on BTN. Check it out on YouTube. It's great. It kind of shows how well it's schemed up for Jack Cohn. Unfortunately for them, I don't know. I still don't know. Are they as good as an Ohio State? Are they going to be able to keep up with them? And even then, like I haven't seen them play against a team that, I mean, Michigan State's offense is inept. So I'm worried for Iowa because it's not quite inept, but it's not anywhere close to as efficient as any of these elite level teams. So it'll be really interesting to see how Wisconsin can hold up against those type of teams. They might have been holding some plays back for Ohio State the following week because they play Illinois this next week, which they'll probably just pound into submission. I mean, it's going to be bad. Um, and but then we'll see what they do when they play against Ohio State. But can they do it again to Iowa the next week? Because if there is something, Iowa has kept really good teams at a very. I mean, Penn State's really good. Penn State only scored 17 points, and Iowa's still in that game late into the fourth quarter. So I want to see still some more explosiveness out of Wisconsin offense. I think their defense is championship caliber. It can play with anybody in the country.
We're gonna find out in 2 weeks, and this is a college football fan. Way less than 2 weeks, week and a half. I can't wait for that Wisconsin Ohio State game. That's going to be appointment viewing on October 26th for sure. But first, Blake mentioned it. Number 6 Badgers travel to Illinois at 11 a.m. on BTN. Let's talk about the Illini. We've got them down in the cellar of the division in our power rankings. Lost again. Fell behind 28-0 against Michigan, ended up losing 42-25. Give Illinois credit, really actually fought back in that game and made it somewhat interesting before Wolverines pulled away late, but Lovey Bears are struggling. There's just no way around it. 2-4, 0-3 in the league. We talked about their goal really needing to be a bowl game this year. That's not really looking very likely. My question to you, Blake, is if they don't make a bowl, are they hiring a new coach this offseason? I haven't seen a ton of reports, but you hear rumors coming out of Champaign that Lovey might be on the hot seat if this season keeps going the way it's going.
I think honestly, I'd give him one more year. I think Lovey Smith has a proven track record of actually being a good coach and being able to manage stuff. He hasn't been. I mean, I don't. To my knowledge, I don't think he's ever been a head coach on the college ranks. So it takes some time to get used to that type of. I mean, you'd think before they hired him to see what his plan was and whether or not to vet. That's the problem with some of these ads is they're not really. Some of them aren't really football or even truly organizational guys from that standpoint. Whether or not these coaches can actually go out and put together a staff and how do they manage them, because there's the Bill Belichick way where he basically gives guys their job and then he just manages what they do on the job, and it's do your job, but he keeps a close eye on each and every single coach, that they don't really learn how to do everything else. But then you got guys that are more big picture and more collaborative, and it works that way. So you got to decide right then and there, how is that going to work? What I would, if I was an AD looking for improvement from Lovey Smith, I'd say, okay, where's the talent at? If you're not a if you're not a football guy that understands scouting or anything like that, I would probably bring in a couple outside scouts to say, where's the talent at? Because it looks like they do have talent on the outside, on the skill position players. They do have some talent, maybe not a lot of depth or really large guys on the defensive line. Offensive line looks pretty poor. Quarterback and running back. Quarterback is serviceable. Brandon Peters can win in this league if he had
When he's
time,
healthy,
when he's
didn't play
healthy.
this past week.
Exactly. So, and they do have good wide receivers as well. There's this guy that had this really long last name that was pretty freakish. I mean, heck, they had Geronimo Allison a couple years ago. I don't know if he was with Lovey Smith or not. I can't remember. But they do have good athletes. But again, if you don't, and then also trying to kind of figure out what is his style, what is he missing, where can things be from the defensive meeting room to the offensive meeting room, where is things getting missed and where are they not getting coached, and is he not willing to help change that culture? What is the culture like? Because that's what's going to be interesting with Brom is like, hey, what is these benchings of these older players going to do to the culture and the program? Is that going to actually be a good thing, or is it going to be a negative thing? Are these guys going to become cancers, or are they going to basically come together and work harder and hopefully win a spot back later that year and be better for it, be better men for it? But if you don't do it the right way, how is that being handled? That's what I'd be looking at from Lovey's perspective. Illinois was in shambles, and it's been in shambles basically since Ron Zook left, and he got fired, which he probably shouldn't have got fired. I mean, geez, that guy took him to the Rose Bowl, for goodness sakes. Hey, lots of programs have done that though in years past. Nebraska is one of them. Coaching, getting rid of coaches too soon or not knowing exactly what they were.
Yeah.
Illinois is on the same level as Purdue at this point. They, for whatever reason, haven't been able to get the top talent out of Chicago, haven't been able to get the top talent out of Missouri or any of the surrounding places for whatever reason. Champaign is probably, I mean, I'm guessing they're probably the smallest city in the Big Ten. I don't know how big West Lafayette is, but I'm assuming that I know Champaign's not very big.
That's a
Champaign,
good
Urbana,
question. Somebody look that up and let us know. I don't know how big Evanston is technically either, but
it's in
basically
Chicago.
tucked right into Chicago, so it's hard to separate the two. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
So I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, why it's so difficult to get people there? Because I love Illinois campus; it's beautiful, and not just. I mean, it's a great. I think it's a great small town or a small-ish city, and it would be a fun place to go to school. But if you don't have tenacious recruiters, you don't have guys that are very detail oriented on teaching people, because that's what is frustrating from those outside linebackers perspective with Nebraska. Is either you're coaching it or you're allowing it to happen. So why aren't these guys either getting removed or maybe you're coaching it to happen? And then I'm not sure what exactly the scheme is. So I'm not understanding where somebody like the in-game coaching, why haven't they been pulled? And it could be because they want to save some red shirts, or B, they don't have anybody behind them that can do anything close to what is going on the field, which both are fairly scary because then it could just be the same old for the rest of the year. Same thing with Lovey Smith. Is he missing something moving from the practice to the game? And what is that? And is it something that can be fixed, or does there be another complete tear down and culture rebuild again?
Yeah, I'm with you. Despite him being there a few years, Illinois, one of the youngest teams in the country this season, and they were last year too. Some places you expect to have a shorter leash just based on resources and expectations. I don't think Illinois, if Illinois' leadership is self-aware, I don't think it puts itself in that category. And I'd give him another year or two to try to keep building. The numbers aren't good. Illini 11-30 under Lovey's watch, 4-25 in Big Ten play. But Blake did a good job just now of breaking down kind of the nuances behind that overall record. Let's move into the Chicago Metro, talk about Northwestern, number 6 in our rankings this week. Also 0-3 in league play, had a bye week last week to get healthy. Unfortunately, their next action comes Friday against the Ohio State. Any chance for the Cats to make that a game, Blake?
No. Well, there's always a chance with Northwestern. They make every game ugly. It's on that, and it's in Chicago, right? It's in Evanston. It's on the
Correct.
grass. Yeah, so it's on the grass, which nobody plays on anymore. They grow up nice and tall for those really fast, big teams.
Those long spikes, can you screw in the really long spikes?
And nobody else plays on it, and it's just difficult to prepare for. You see plenty of teams, and there's a couple. I mean, there's been years past where Ohio State is really good, and for whatever reason that game's close. There's turnovers. There's a little bit of magic in Evanston on that field, and you know, I just wish Pat Fitzgerald could bring some of the. There was a really good article in the Athletic this week about how Northwestern basically revolutionized and brought in the spread run game into college football under Walker, who had a heart attack in 2006. So it was a really good article. I'd recommend it to people. Try out the 7-day free trial if you don't want to buy it.
We are not getting paid to say that either, by the way.
No, but it is all really good, especially, I mean, Big Ten fans. Wisconsin has its own writer. I think Iowa has its own writer. Minnesota, if I remember correctly, does too.
Not for college football, but some other very good beat writers in this market. They tag team football a little bit.
Yeah,
Jesse Temple is the Wisconsin guy, a former colleague of mine, and he is fantastic.
And Scott Docterman I think he's out of Des Moines. He was with the Des Moines Register for a while.
Yep.
He's really good. Mitch Sherman from Nebraska. So yeah, we'll go read that article. It's really good. It was insane how they went from like in the 120th in college football for their offense, and when they brought in this new offense for basically they spread it out, but they were still running the game. Their running game, their offense was like ranked in the top 15 for about 5 straight years, and they were still running the ball out of the spread formation. I would say Pat Fitzgerald needs somebody. He's had a lot of continuity on his staff, but it might be time for him to be thinking about getting somebody that can figure out a quick fix to see what talent he has and how can they get better, because they just have had pretty darn good defenses. I mean, geez, that defense has kept them in a lot of games. And for a place like Northwestern to be able to do that, they need an offense to back that up. And it's kind of sad from that perspective. But Ohio State, I honestly think that right now they're playing like the best team in the country, even though they probably haven't played the best of competition.
Talent-wise, they're right there.
Yeah, talent-wise, they'll hang with anybody in the country. And I think Ryan Day he learned from Urban Meyer how to stay on guys' butts even against lesser opponents. So
even in 2019, it's just amazing. Amazing you can still have some discipline and run a program that way. Shocking. Then there's Iowa. I think the Hawkeyes are kind of a microcosm of this division in some ways. A lot of promise coming into this year, but mixed with a lot of disappointment. Great defense, as you've alluded to, but the offense has been putrid the past few weeks. That was the case in that 17-12 loss to Penn State. I don't think Stanley's getting a whole lot of help at quarterback. I think that's part of it. He tends to not play very well on the road himself, so that's been a struggle. But their season's really at a crossroads right now. 4-2, 1-2 in the league heading into Saturday's contest against Purdue, which is obviously playing with some confidence coming off that Maryland win. Like I said earlier, lose to the Boilermakers, and all heck might break loose in Iowa City, which visualizing that is uncomfortable at best.
Is this game in Iowa City?
You talk about Iowa, and I will look that up because I don't remember.
Well, that's the thing is like, I mean, geez, Iowa's defense is so good and it's fun to watch. I mean, I played defense in college and high school, and I love offense. Don't get me wrong. That's probably what I wish I would have played more if I just wasn't probably the most explosive athlete, but I was smart enough to figure out where the ball was going to be going. That's the reason why I played defense. And I mean,
In Iowa City.
so I do think that they will probably come out and win that game
They
then
definitely
against
should.
Purdue. They should, but I mean, geez, you just never know with Brom, and for whatever reason, it seems like there's always that one game where they have the breakout on offense against a good team, and maybe they're going to need that against Purdue, and maybe not. Who knows? I think they're probably too big to. They'll be able to run it, even though they've really struggled to run the ball, which is not a good sign for Iowa because that's what they're built to do. I think their offensive line has been a disappointment. It's not. I mean, it's above average, but it's not near as good as it's been. Heck, this is the thing that you got to remember. They played Michigan and Wisconsin, and Michigan and Penn State, the two teams that they lost, and both of those defensive lines have lots of NFL talent on them. The Michigan game against Wisconsin was essentially Nebraska versus Minnesota. Bad run fits, really bad run fits. Guys were not getting in the right holes, and Jonathan Taylor is too explosive. That's why they kicked the crap out of him. Iowa, still, they're so disciplined. They are not missing those run fits, and but Penn State can, and Penn State, same thing. They're not missing their run fits anymore as well against Iowa. So it. What I would be frustrated about as an Iowa fan is the lack of creativity from Ferentz. It seems like they can do it for one game. Both Brian and Kirk. I don't, and that's we just don't know whose problem it is because maybe Brian, if he takes over, he'll open up the playbook and you'll see a lot more stuff. The but then you got really good wide receivers. You got a pretty darn good quarterback that is probably going to get drafted in probably the 4 through 7 range on the NFL
Later
draft.
rounds, but a good arm,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and could be a really good backup in the NFL. Maybe not quite a starter,
He's a
but
classic Iowa quarterback.
but hey, I don't care who you are. If you get in the NFL, you're good. And that's what's frustrating is that now they don't have an offensive line that is capable of blocking elite defensive linemen. What's going to happen? Why isn't there something else going on? You see some of the, and I'd like to see more of this with Nebraska and even Purdue starting to do a little bit more of it where there's rollouts. Uh, and Northwestern used to do this a lot too when they had a weaker offensive line. Rollouts, sprint passes, more play action passes, getting your line. But if there is a weakness of Stanley, he doesn't throw very well on the run, so that's probably part of the reason why they can't do it. But he's not getting any time, so there's not a lot, and so they're having to resort to very simple, quick game stuff, and they haven't been able to do any deep shots. And but when they are doing deep shots, these receivers are winning 50-50 balls. They're really good. They have a guy that was a high jump champ and like jumped like 9 feet or something. I mean, something insane. He jumped something really high, and it would just be really frustrating for an Iowa fan to see some of the talent on offense get wasted like it has, just because for whatever reason they can't figure out the offensive line, which is their bread and butter.
Right. It's bizarre. You're not used to seeing that from an Iowa program. But in any case, yeah, they match up with Purdue this weekend again in Iowa City. So we will see what happens with Iowa, not only in that game, but the rest of the season. Time for our stories of the week. I cheated. I have two, but they both involve Illinois. First one short. They're putting up a statue of Dick Butkus campus at the facility there. My first question is, how does Dick Butkus not already have a statue? But when they unveiled it and did the press conference, his money quote was, "I had fun knocking the S out of people." Um, what an American treasure Dick Butkus is, and again, we talked about the tradition in this division, and he's right up there in the lore of these programs. Also
Well, they
involving
had
the
they had
Illini,
Red Grange, who's like probably
Red
the best
Grange,
athlete of
yeah,
all time, one of the best athletes of all
absolutely.
time.
Tops. He's on the Mount Rushmore. There's no doubt about it. So I thought that was pretty cool watching that video. Uh, Dick doesn't necessarily look from the shoulders down like he could still do that to somebody, but you still see that fire in his eyes, and an American treasure. One of those guys that as a fan of my age, you wish you kind of had been alive to see them in their heyday. I was never a big Chicago Bears fan, but reading about those Bears teams, the '85 Bears, and even like Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo and some of those stories, Buckus is right there too. So very very cool. Also involving the Illini, it was announced this week that the Huskers and Illini are going to play a game in Ireland. So uh, number one, we'll have to find a pub in Dublin to do a live show from the Simply the West podcast on location in Dublin. But that'll be interesting. That game is going to kick off both teams' 2021 campaign. It's in week 0. Obviously, Husker fans travel very well. That will be a fun trip for the more affluent members of Husker Nation. My biggest question coming out of this, though, is what does Illinois really stand to gain from it? They gave up a home game. Obviously, you get some national and even international exposure, but we know the fan following isn't nearly what it is in Nebraska. So it was just kind of interesting to me that Illinois agreed to sign off on this, give up a home game for it. But in any case, should be a cool event out there in Dublin to kick off the 2021 season.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean, they got to be getting paid by this Aer Lingus football,
Erlingish.
and that's
Yes.
the name of that's the name, and that's what the name of the thing is called. It'll be interesting. I mean, it's far enough away where I'm like, hey, if we can save up some money, that'd be a fun trip to try and do
Yeah, I was
that.
kind of
And
thinking the same thing. Maybe
I
we'll
mean, if
just
it was
find a
next year,
pot
I'd
of
be like, oh
gold at
shit,
the
we
end of
can't
the
go.
rainbow first, and yeah.
But yeah, I mean, who knows? There's got to be some sort of monetary gain from that perspective, like from sponsorships overseas, and it's probably kind. I mean, I don't know if it's quite like the NFL over there because I think they actually do have quite a few fans, but from it might be more like a spectacle, kind of like the circus coming to town once every 5 years now or whatever, where it's like, oh, the Irish will come see some of the newfangled
Hey,
American.
look at the Americans and their silly sport. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, this is brutal. This is
Why do they call
great.
it football? They're not even kicking.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't they call it oblong ball? And yeah, I don't know exactly what it is, and that was gonna be my story of the week, so you stole that from me. But
Oh, I
I,
stole
I
your
do. I
thunder.
mean,
We need to show notes. We have notes. We put a lot of preparation into this. I don't know if people realize that. There's a lot of research that goes into this.
well, and it's funny that you talk about the Dick Butkus thing, and it kind of comes back to the CTE stuff because like I understand. I mean, it's part of the not that like I knew anything about CTE when I was in college or anything like that. I just realized I wasn't going pro, and I'm pretty sure I had two concussions that I didn't tell anybody about while I was playing, and I started having memory problems, a little bit of ADHD in class, a little bit harder to concentrate, and I was just like, what? Why am I doing this anymore? I I'm getting hurt and I'm not gonna go pro. Why would I play this any longer? So that's the reason why I quit and was able to still stay at Benedictine, luckily. And um, but that's the reason why I fell in love with it. It has nothing to and I if you're a pro athlete though, that's part. I mean, yes, there are some people like, oh, this is the only way to get out of poverty, and yes, but in the end, you play 1 year of pro football. even at the bare minimum, which I think right now is about $650,000, you get activated to active roster. You make $650,000. That's great starter money to get going.
Yeah,
I
I would
don't
have been okay
understand.
with
I
that
am still
salary out of
very
college.
frustrated by this argumentation of like, oh, this is going to go away, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's still safer than the Coliseum. We're
Hey,
not feeding you to the lions anymore. This
supply
is
and
the
demand,
closest
man.
thing that we're
It's
going to
a
get.
service and there's a demand for it. And as long as there's a demand for it, it's going to exist.
Yeah, and obviously, no man is meant to play for even quarterbacks. Like they're not still not meant to play into their 40s. Yes, I know we're seeing Tom Brady do it, but he's a rarity because he hasn't taken near as many hits. Because he's been in the best franchise with the best offensive line coach in history. I mean, the work that offensive line, I think what's his name, Scarnecchia, Dante Scarnecchia. The work he's done with some of these guys that aren't like high draft picks is unfathomable. I mean, he's a god among offensive line coaches. Uh, I would love to hear him speak on what he's teaching guys because he turns decent guys into great offensive lines. So that's my big thing on college football and football in general is I don't think it's going away. I think technology is going to continually make it safer and people to play longer and longer. But game is not meant to be a career from a career standpoint. And our world is changing too. I mean, so many people change jobs. The world that people stay in the same job at the same company for years on years just doesn't happen anymore. We see it with our friends. I think you changed jobs a couple different times already. It's not the same thing. I'm not saying you're going to do it again. It's just we don't this culture. We don't live in the same culture, and yet we need to also remember that this game is not meant to be a career for 20 plus years.
We'll talk more about the future of the game during the off season too. We have a couple guests that we might even try to line up to talk about some of these bigger picture topics. So that's a good teaser and segue. But gosh, before that, a whole lot of season left. Can't wait to see what
Remember,
happens during the
almost
second
everybody
half of
has a
the season.
chance. Nebraska still has a chance. Iowa still
Right.
has a chance.
Yeah, nothing's a
Wisconsin.
foregone conclusion quite yet.
No, I'll give Nebraska's chances like at less than 3%. And same with I think Purdue is out of it already, and so is
Northwestern,
Illinois.
Purdue, and Illinois are probably out of it
I
for
think
all intents and
mathematically
purposes.
speaking, but still Nebraska, Iowa,
You're
Minnesota.
saying there's a chance.
They're saying there's a chance we're going some Dumb and Dumber on there. So yeah, I mean that's what's crazy is that geez, there's a bye week. Maybe Scott Frost works some magic, wins the rest of the games. Don't think it's likely. That could be the same thing. Minnesota, obviously, they're 3-0 right now in the Big Ten. They're obviously still on the right track. But Iowa, they go out, they beat Wisconsin. They're right back
Yeah,
on track.
all bets are off. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you following along with us this season. Looking forward to many more fun conversations and weekends before it's all said and done. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts, including Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, and a couple more. Check us out. Just Google Simply the West Podcast. We are on a Wix.com site. You can find us there. Thanks for tuning in once again. For Blake Molly, I'm Phil Irvin. Y'all be good now.